At exactly 9:12 p.m., under a 20-foot Christmas tree dripping in gold lights, I signed my own divorce papers while my wife's entire family laughed and clinked champagne glasses. Charlotte called me a mistake, said I'd never measure up, and they all watched me cry like it was part of the entertainment. What they didn't know was that my signature wasn't surrender, it was a trigger. 8 years ago, her grandfather named me sole heir to the Langford Trust, and Clause 14 activates the second the marriage ends. As her phone started blowing up and her father's face drained white, I finally looked up and said, "You didn't just divorce me. You forfeited everything." And that was only the beginning. "Go ahead, Michael. Sign it. Let's not pretend this was ever forever." That's what my wife said under a 20-foot Christmas tree glowing gold in the center of her family's living room. $100,000 in decorations, crystal chandeliers reflecting off marble floors, champagne flowing like we were celebrating something sacred. In a way, we were. The end of me, at least that's what they thought. I stood there in a tailored tux, holding divorce papers that felt heavier than the 5-pound crystal ornament swaying above my head. Charlotte's cousins were filming on their phones. Her father smirked into his scotch. Someone actually laughed when my hand started to shake. 8 years of marriage reduced to a holiday spectacle. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't remind them who covered the mortgage when the market dipped or who quietly wired money to keep her boutique investment afloat. None of that mattered tonight. What mattered was the narrative. I was the underachieving husband, the quiet one, the man who married into power and never quite fit the picture. Charlotte lifted her glass and said, "To new beginnings." The room echoed with applause, and I let them believe I was breaking. I let my shoulders drop. I let my eyes gloss over. Because sometimes the most powerful position in a room is the one nobody is threatened by. The ink touched paper at exactly 9:12 p.m. I signed my name slowly, like a man surrendering something precious. A tear slid down my face. It wasn't hard to summon. 8 years is a long time to love someone who slowly decides you're not enough. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 8 years ago, her grandfather Edward Langford made a decision in a quiet hospital room 2,000 miles away in Boston. A decision he never announced at family dinners. A decision he documented in a trust none of them had bothered to read carefully. Charlotte thought tonight was an execution. Her father thought it was a correction. Her brother thought it was entertainment. I folded the signed papers neatly and handed them back without a word. The room buzzed louder now, like they could finally exhale. They believed the balance of power had just shifted permanently in their favor. They believed I was walking away with nothing but dignity and a modest condo downtown. What they didn't see was the phone in my inside jacket pocket. What they didn't hear was the silent notification that had already been sent 30 seconds earlier. What they didn't understand was that my signature wasn't surrender. It was activation. And as Charlotte's smile widened beneath the glow of Christmas lights, her future was quietly beginning to narrow in ways she couldn't yet see. The laughter did not stop when I handed the papers back. It grew warmer, looser, like the room had just witnessed a necessary correction. Charlotte leaned in and kissed the air near my cheek, the way she did at charity galas when photographers were watching. "I hope you find what you are looking for," she said softly, but there was no softness in her eyes. Her father, William Langford, adjusted his cufflinks and gave me a nod that felt like dismissal. 8 years ago, that same man shook my hand and told me I was lucky to marry into legacy. Tonight, he looked at me as if legacy had finally cleaned itself up. I slipped my phone back into my jacket pocket after feeling the subtle vibration. The message had gone through. Execute Clause 14. No drama. No raised voice. Just a line of text to Thomas Caldwell, the family attorney who handled Edward Langford's estate. The same Edward who once sat beside me on a hospital balcony in Boston, 2,000 miles from this marble mansion, and asked me a simple question. If they underestimate you, will you resent them or will you outlast them? I told him I would outlast them. He smiled like he had been waiting for that answer. Back in the present, Charlotte's brother was recounting a story about how I never quite fit in at board meetings, how I preferred spreadsheets over speeches. The cousins laughed again. They always confused quiet with weakness. I moved toward the bar, poured myself a small glass of water, and watched the Christmas lights reflect against the windows that overlooked 5 acres of perfectly manicured snow. From the outside, the house looked untouchable. From the inside, it felt loud and hollow. My phone buzzed again, this time longer. I did not check it immediately. Power does not rush. Power waits. Charlotte was already speaking with her mother about listing the downtown condo, dividing furniture, reorganizing her calendar for the new year. She was planning a future she believed was clean and uncomplicated. What she did not know was that Edward Langford had rewritten the definition of uncomplicated before he died. The trust was structured carefully, layered through holding companies and voting shares. Publicly, Charlotte held a respectable portion. Privately, controlling interest required marriage continuity. Clause 14 was not punishment. It was protection. Protection against impulsive exits, against influence from outsiders, against exactly what was unfolding tonight under gold ornaments and catered desserts. Another vibration. This time Charlotte's phone chimed across the room. She glanced down casually at first, then again with a slight crease in her forehead. Her father's device followed seconds later. The music kept playing. The laughter continued. But there is a specific kind of silence that forms inside a person when numbers begin shifting in ways they do not understand. I watched that silence bloom in her expression like frost spreading across glass. I took a slow breath, steady and even. 8 years ago, I promised her grandfather I would not react emotionally when the moment came. I would respond structurally. Tonight was not about revenge. It was about alignment. And as Charlotte's smile began to fade beneath the glow of white Christmas lights, I realized the room had finally started listening, even if they did not yet know why. Charlotte's fingers tightened around her phone like it had suddenly become heavier. She tried to keep her posture relaxed, but the change was subtle and unmistakable. Her eyes scanned the screen once, then again, slower this time. Across the room, William Langford's expression shifted from mild irritation to something sharper, something calculating. The music still drifted through hidden ceiling speakers, a soft rendition of a holiday classic, but the energy in the room had tilted by a few degrees. It was the kind of shift most people do not notice until it is too late. I remained where I was, a glass of water in my hand, watching without staring. 8 years ago, Edward Langford had explained it clearly while winter sunlight spilled across the hospital balcony in Boston. The trust is not about control, he said. It is about continuity. The family survives when emotion does not dictate ownership. At the time, I thought he was speaking in theory. Tonight, I understood he was preparing me for this exact moment. Charlotte looked up, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. It is probably just a banking delay, she said lightly, though no one had asked. Her mother checked her own phone. Then her brother did the same. Conversations thinned into fragments. Words like access, authorization, temporary review floated through the air in hushed tones. William stepped aside and dialed a number with deliberate precision. He turned his back to the room, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The Langford portfolio was not small. Commercial real estate across 3 states. Majority voting shares in 2 manufacturing firms. A private equity arm that carried the family name. For decades, they operated as if stability was permanent. What they never examined closely was the structure beneath that stability. Clause 14 did not seize assets. It suspended voting privileges tied to marital alignment. It redirected temporary control to the trustee pending review. And the trustee was Thomas Caldwell, the same man who received my message less than 10 minutes ago. Charlotte approached me slowly, her heels soft against the marble floor. "Did you know about this?" she asked, her voice still controlled but thinner now. I met her eyes evenly. "About what?" I asked, not with sarcasm, not with cruelty, just with steady calm. Her jaw tightened. "The accounts are under review. Dad's office line is not responding. Something is happening." I nodded once, as if processing new information. "Sometimes structures protect themselves when changes occur," I said quietly. It was not a threat. It was a fact. Across the room, William ended his call and looked directly at me for the first time that night, without superiority, without dismissal, just evaluation. In that gaze, I saw recognition forming. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. Edward had chosen carefully. Not the loudest grandson. Not the most charismatic heir. He chose the one who would not react emotionally when the room laughed. The Christmas lights still shimmered across polished surfaces, but now the brightness felt artificial, almost fragile. 8 years of being underestimated had prepared me for exactly this silence. And as Charlotte's confidence continued to erode beneath layers of notifications she could not control, I realized something simple and undeniable. The evening had not unraveled. It had realigned. William Langford did not raise his voice when he walked back toward the center of the room, but the temperature changed around him. Conversations faded mid-sentence. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. He looked at Charlotte first, then at me, and finally toward the hallway where his private office sat behind a set of double oak doors. "We are experiencing a temporary administrative review," he announced evenly, the kind of tone that usually settled markets and reassured investors. Tonight, it convinced no one. Charlotte's composure was thinning now. "Dad, the access codes are not working. The executive dashboard is locked." She tried to laugh as if technology itself had chosen poor timing. Her mother whispered something about calling the bank directly. Her brother was already stepping outside to get better reception. I stood still, hands relaxed at my sides, and allowed the moment to unfold without interruption. 8 years ago, Edward Langford told me something else on that balcony in Boston. "Power is not loud, Michael. Power is structured. If you build it correctly, it does not argue. It activates." At the time, I had just married into the family and still believed loyalty alone would be enough to secure my place. Edward understood something deeper. He understood that legacy without discipline erodes. Charlotte turned back to me, eyes sharper now. "What did you do?" she asked, not accusing, not yet, but searching. I met her gaze without blinking. "I signed what you asked me to sign," I replied calmly. The truth has a way of sounding dangerous when timing is precise. William studied me more carefully now. The earlier dismissal was gone. In its place was calculation. He was replaying conversations in his mind, revisiting clauses he once skimmed, remembering the hospital trip he cut short 8 winters ago because business called him back to New York. He had trusted that control would default to bloodline. He had not accounted for alignment. A notification chimed again across the room, this time from the large tablet mounted near the bar where market updates typically scrolled in real time. The Langford holding page displayed a simple message: governance review in progress. Temporary suspension of voting authority. Charlotte inhaled sharply. "That cannot be right," she whispered. William stepped closer to me. Not confrontational, just closer. "Clause 14, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. I nodded once. No smile, no triumph, just acknowledgement. The music continued playing, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to another house entirely. The Christmas tree still glowed 20 feet tall, ornaments reflecting a room that had begun to understand its own fragility. Charlotte shook her head slightly, as if rejecting the possibility. "That clause protects the family," she insisted. "Exactly," I answered softly. In that single word, realization settled across William's face. Protection is neutral. It does not choose sides. It enforces structure when emotion disrupts it. The laughter from earlier in the evening had vanished completely. In its place was silence thick enough to feel. 8 years of being underestimated had not hardened me. They had disciplined me. And as Charlotte stood beneath the glow of lights that once made her feel untouchable, I could see something new in her expression. Not anger. Not yet. Understanding. Charlotte's understanding did not arrive gently. It landed in stages, each one quieter than the last. She looked at her father, searching for immediate correction, for the confident reassurance that had always restored order in this house. William did not offer it. Instead, he walked toward the bar, set his glass down carefully, and inhaled through his nose as though recalibrating decades of assumption. "The trust requires marital continuity for direct voting authority," he said slowly, almost clinically. "Upon dissolution, interim control defaults to the trustee pending structural review." Charlotte shook her head. "But that is temporary," she insisted. "It does not transfer ownership." William's eyes flicked toward me again. "Ownership was never the issue," he replied. "Control was." 8 winters ago, Edward Langford anticipated this exact confusion. He understood that families mistake access for entitlement. He structured the trust so that continuity would outweigh ego. What Charlotte had believed to be leverage was actually a condition. And conditions do not negotiate when they are triggered. Her brother re-entered. From the terrace, pale beneath the exterior lighting. "The board portal is frozen," he said quietly. "Legal says Caldwell authorized the review personally." At the mention of Thomas Caldwell's name, the air shifted again. He was not dramatic. He was not impulsive. He was precise. If he had initiated a governance review on Christmas night, it was not accidental. Charlotte turned back to me with a mix of disbelief and something more vulnerable. "You planned this," she said. I did not rush to answer. Planning suggests aggression. This was alignment. "I respected the structure your grandfather built," I replied evenly. "You asked for dissolution." The structure responded. It was the truth stripped of theatrics. Around us, the decorations that once symbolized stability now felt ornamental, almost irrelevant. The 20-foot tree still shimmered. Silver ribbon still reflected candlelight. Yet none of it masked the growing awareness that the family's authority had just shifted to a place none of them could immediately access. William stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Charlotte and I could hear. "How long?" he asked. I met his gaze without hostility. "Since the hospital balcony in Boston," I answered. He understood instantly. Edward had not confided in him fully. That realization stung more than any financial suspension. Charlotte pressed her lips together, processing the timeline. 8 years of dinners, vacations, quarterly meetings, subtle dismissal. 8 years of assuming I stood in the background because I lacked capability rather than because I chose position. "This is not over," she said softly, though the conviction in her voice had thinned. "No," I agreed calmly. "It is not. Because governance review was only the first stage. The trust required evaluation of executive alignment, fiduciary responsibility, and long-term continuity. It did not punish emotion. It examined it." William exhaled slowly, the weight of legacy pressing more visibly against him now. The family had always measured strength by volume and visibility. Tonight they were confronted with structure. And structure does not laugh. It does not mock. It simply enforces what was written long before anyone in this room decided to turn marriage into spectacle. As Charlotte stood beneath the glow of lights that once magnified her confidence, she began to grasp something far more unsettling than financial suspension. She had not lost money. She had lost certainty. And certainty, once fractured, does not restore itself on command. The room did not erupt. It constricted. Conversations that once filled the air with easy superiority had collapsed into measured whispers. Charlotte stood perfectly still now, her phone resting against her palm like an object she no longer trusted. William's posture remained upright, but the confidence that once defined him had shifted into calculation. He was no longer presiding over a holiday gathering. He was assessing structural exposure. I watched the understanding settle across the room in quiet increments. The cousins stopped filming. The champagne glasses remained untouched. Even the soft instrumental music felt intrusive against the silence forming between us. 8 years ago, Edward Langford explained that legacy fails when pride outruns discipline. He told me the trust was never designed to reward proximity. It was designed to preserve continuity. "Blood can inherit," he said, "but alignment must be proven." At the time, I thought he was speaking abstractly. Tonight, his words moved through this room like an unseen current. Charlotte finally broke the stillness. "This review will clear," she said, but the certainty was gone from her tone. "It is procedural." William did not answer her immediately. Instead, he asked me a different question. "Are you requesting permanent transfer of voting authority?" His voice was steady, but it carried weight now. That was the real issue. Suspension was inconvenient. Transfer would be historic. I held his gaze evenly. "I have requested governance evaluation," I replied. "The trustee will determine alignment." It was not dramatic. It was administrative. But in families built on image, administration can feel like upheaval. Charlotte's mother stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You would destabilize everything over pride?" she asked me quietly. I did not react to the accusation. Pride had nothing to do with this. "Stability requires structure," I answered calmly. "Structure requires accountability." The words were not sharp. They were measured. And because they were measured, they landed heavier. Charlotte's brother checked his phone again and swallowed. "The board meeting scheduled for January has been advanced," he said. "Tomorrow at 9 in the morning." That was Caldwell. He moved quickly when clauses were triggered. William exhaled slowly, as if finally accepting the reality unfolding in front of him. "You understood the implications before signing," he said to me. It was not a question. I nodded once. "Yes." Charlotte looked at me then, not with anger, but with something far more vulnerable. She was replaying every private conversation where she assumed I lacked leverage. Every moment, she dismissed my silence as insecurity. She mistook patience for weakness. She mistook composure for dependency. The Christmas lights still shimmered across polished marble, but they no longer illuminated certainty. They highlighted fragility. 8 years of marriage had ended in less than 10 minutes. But what ended was not simply a relationship. It was assumption. William straightened his jacket, regaining composure piece by piece. "This will be addressed formally," he said. Of course it would. Legacy does not collapse overnight. It recalibrates. I placed my empty glass on the bar and adjusted my cuffs. I had not raised my voice. I had not argued. I had not demanded apology. Structure does not require volume. It requires timing. And as the family that once laughed at my tears stood beneath a 20-foot tree now glowing against uncertainty, one thing became unmistakably clear. The evening had not spiraled out of control. It had revealed who truly understood it. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured in small, controlled movements. William excused himself to his office without another word, closing the oak doors with deliberate calm. Charlotte remained where she stood, as though stepping away might make the situation more real. The cousins drifted toward the far side of the room, their earlier confidence replaced by careful distance. It is remarkable how quickly celebration can turn into observation. No one was laughing now. They were studying. They were recalculating. I adjusted my jacket and walked slowly toward the window that overlooked the snow-covered lawn stretching beyond the stone terrace. 5 acres of pristine white, untouched, quiet. From the outside, the Langford estate still looked permanent, invulnerable. Inside, permanence had begun asking questions. Charlotte approached again, slower this time, her voice lower. "You could have told me," she said. It was not accusation. It was reflection. I considered her words carefully before responding. "You were not interested in structures," I replied evenly. "You were interested in outcomes." That distinction mattered. For years she evaluated me based on visible metrics. Title, presence, volume in boardrooms. She mistook restraint for deficiency. She assumed silence meant absence of leverage. 8 years ago on that hospital balcony, Edward told me something I never shared with her. "When they measure you by noise, let them," he said. "Noise fades. Structure remains." Tonight was proof. Charlotte folded her arms, more out of uncertainty than defense. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. That was the first question she had asked all evening that acknowledged consequence. "Tomorrow the trustee conducts formal review," I answered calmly. "Voting authority remains suspended until alignment is verified." She looked past me toward the hallway where her father disappeared. "And if alignment is not verified?" she pressed. I did not dramatize the response. "Then governance shifts permanently." The words did not require emphasis. Their weight carried itself. Across the room, her brother whispered into his phone again, likely reaching out to legal contacts who would confirm what Caldwell had already initiated. There would be no quick reversal. The trust was not emotional. It did not respond to outrage. It responded to documentation. Charlotte exhaled slowly, as though finally confronting the full timeline. 8 years of assuming leverage. 8 minutes to lose it. "You let me believe you had nothing," she said quietly. I shook my head once. "I let you believe what you wanted to believe. There is a difference." She absorbed that in silence. For the first time tonight, there was no audience around us. No laughter. No spectacle. Just consequence. The Christmas lights continued to glow, reflecting softly against the marble floor, but the illusion of control they once symbolized had dissolved. In its place was clarity. I had not humiliated her. I had not raised my voice. I had not retaliated with theatrics. I honored the structure that existed long before either of us turned marriage into performance. When William finally re-emerged from his office, his expression had changed. It was not anger. It was acceptance of a negotiation he no longer fully controlled. And as he looked at me across the room, there was something I had never seen in his eyes before. Respect, cautious and reluctant, but unmistakable. William did not raise his voice when he stepped fully back into the room, but something in his posture had settled. Not defeat, not surrender, recognition. The kind a man carries when he understands the ground beneath him has shifted, and arguing with gravity will not help. He looked at Charlotte first, then at me. Caldwell confirmed, he said evenly. The governance review stands. Effective immediately. The words were simple, but they landed heavier than any accusation could have. Charlotte's shoulders stiffened. For how long? She asked. William held her gaze. Until the trustee determines long-term alignment. The phrase echoed softly in the space between us. Alignment. It was never about punishment. It was about continuity. The cousins had gone quiet entirely now, lingering near the edges of the room as though proximity might implicate them in something they no longer understood. The Christmas tree still glowed 20 feet tall, ornaments reflecting fractured versions of each of us in their curved surfaces. Moments earlier, that same glow framed laughter. Now it illuminated consequence. Charlotte stepped closer to her father. You are letting this happen, she said, disbelief edging her tone. William exhaled slowly. I am respecting the structure your grandfather built, he replied. There was no anger in his voice. Only clarity. That was when she finally looked back at me with something different in her eyes. Not contempt. Not pride. Calculation. You could reverse it, she said quietly. It was the first time she acknowledged leverage without dismissing it. I met her gaze steadily. The review was triggered by your decision, I answered. It can only be resolved through process. She understood what that meant. There would be no emotional appeal tonight. No quiet conversation that restored the illusion of control. Structure does not bend to discomfort. It evaluates. Across the room, her brother muttered something about emergency counsel, about early morning calls, about optics. Optics. That word used to define everything in this house. How things looked. How they were perceived. But optics do not override clauses written with precision. 8 winters ago, Edward Langford had chosen discipline over sentiment. He had chosen the person who would not weaponize power recklessly. Tonight was not about winning. It was about honoring what had already been written. Charlotte folded her arms again, but this time it was not defensive. It was protective. So what happens to me? She asked, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. I did not rush the answer. You participate in review, I said calmly. Just like anyone else. Her eyes flickered at that. Just like anyone else. For the first time in her life, she was not insulated by assumption. She was subject to evaluation. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but emotionally. The marble floors, the imported chandeliers, the 5 acres of snow beyond the windows all remained unchanged. But certainty had thinned. William straightened slightly and addressed both of us. Tomorrow at 9, we meet with Caldwell, he said. Until then, no further action. It was a directive, but it carried restraint rather than dominance. I nodded once. I did not gloat. I did not smile. There was no satisfaction in disruption. Only acknowledgement of structure doing exactly what it was designed to do. Charlotte looked around the room one final time, as if trying to reconcile the evening that began with laughter and ended with governance review. 8 minutes to sign. 8 years to understand. And as the lights continued to shimmer against polished marble, one truth settled quietly over the entire estate. Legacy does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who understands it. The party did not resume after that. It lingered in a strange half-state, where no one officially declared it over, yet no one dared to pretend it was still celebration. Charlotte stood near the fireplace now, the glow from the flames casting shifting light across her face. The confidence she carried earlier had softened into something quieter, more internal. William remained composed, but his attention was no longer on guests or presentation. It was on consequence. He had already begun thinking 3 steps ahead, calculating how tomorrow's meeting would unfold, which board members might resist, which would wait and watch. Structure reveals character under pressure. That was something Edward once told me while the Boston skyline shimmered behind him in winter air. When governance activates, he said, you will see who believed in legacy and who only believed in comfort. Tonight, comfort had dissolved. Charlotte's mother approached her gently, whispering something about optics again, about statements, about narrative. Charlotte did not answer immediately. She was replaying something else entirely. Not the laughter, not the spectacle. The moment she asked me to sign. The certainty in her voice. The assumption that the signature meant surrender. I stepped away from the window and toward the hallway, giving the room space to recalibrate. I had not taken anything from them. I had not demanded authority. I had triggered review in response to dissolution. That distinction mattered. At the far end of the hall, framed photographs of Langford milestones lined the wall. Groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, awards, generations smiling in tailored suits beneath banners that read continuity and stewardship. Edward's portrait hung slightly apart from the others, less polished, more deliberate. I paused in front of it for a moment. 8 winters ago, he did not ask me to control his legacy. He asked me to protect its integrity. Protection sometimes looks like disruption. Behind me, I heard Charlotte's footsteps approach, slower now, deliberate rather than reactive. She stopped a few feet away. "Did you ever intend to tell me?" she asked quietly. It was not anger. It was reflection. I considered the question honestly. "I intended to let you see it," I replied, "when you were ready to value it." She absorbed that without immediate defense. For years, she measured worth by visibility. Titles printed in annual reports. Applause in boardrooms. She mistook restraint for lack of ambition. Tonight she confronted something else entirely. Discipline. William joined us moments later, his expression steadier than before. "Caldwell requested preliminary documentation before 9 in the morning," he said. "He is thorough." That was an understatement. Thomas Caldwell did not operate on emotion. He operated on record, on consistency, on alignment over time. Charlotte looked between us, the magnitude settling more fully now. "So tomorrow decides everything," she said. William shook his head slightly. "Tomorrow evaluates everything," he corrected. "Evaluation does not guarantee outcome. It examines it." I nodded once in agreement. 8 years of patience had led to this corridor conversation, beneath framed reminders of what the Langford name represented. Legacy was not applause. It was accountability. And as the firelight flickered across polished floors behind us, the truth became clearer than any Christmas decoration could hide. The review had not been an attack. It had been a mirror. And mirrors do not change what they reflect. They simply reveal it.